Okay, so you want to become a lawyer? The title alone carries weight. Esquire on the door, a six-figure salary within reach, courtroom command, the kind of career where being right and being persuasive is literally the job description. You picture the corner office, the confident stride into a conference room, and a starting salary that shows up in every best-paying degrees ranking online. The path looks clean. Law school, pass the bar, get hired, start earning. Here's what that picture leaves out. The overwhelming majority of law school graduates never see anything close to the salary the internet assumes lawyers make. The number people quote isn't an average most graduates land near. It's one of two peaks in a chart that has almost nothing in the middle. And the people who do land the six-figure job are often working hours that make the salary look a lot less impressive once you calculate what it actually pays per hour. Let's start before law school even begins. Because the competition starts earlier than most people expect. Getting into a good law school requires the law school admission test, the LSAT, and most serious applicants prepare using a formal prep course running $1,000 to $2,000, sometimes more for one-on-one tutoring. Then there's the application process itself, run almost entirely through the Law School Admission Council, which charges its own registration and reporting fees on top of individual school. Application fees that typically run $50 to $100 each. The average competitive applicant applies to somewhere between 10 and 15 schools, which puts total application costs before a single acceptance letter arrives, somewhere in the $1,500 to $3,000 range. Now, let's talk about law school itself, because this is where the real financial commitment begins. According to data, the American Bar Association and U.S. News track annually, the total cost of attendance, tuition, fees, and living expenses combined for a private law school over 3 years runs approximately $200,000 to $250,000. Public law schools at in-state tuition rates are meaningfully cheaper, typically $120,000 to $180,000 total, but still represent a massive financial commitment for a degree that, unlike medical school, doesn't guarantee a defined career outcome at the end. The median law school debt at graduation, according to figures the ABA publishes, sits right around $130,000 to $165,000. And at the most expensive private schools, debt loads exceeding $200,000 are common. That debt starts accruing interest immediately, and unlike medical residency, there's no guaranteed multi-year training pipeline waiting on the other side to eventually justify it. Here's the number that should be the first thing every prospective law student researches, and it's the number the profession itself has spent years trying to make more visible because so many people misunderstand it. The National Association for Law Placement, NALP, publishes an annual salary distribution chart for new law graduates, and it doesn't look like a normal bell curve. It's bimodal, meaning it has two distinct peaks with almost nothing in between. One peak sits around $50,000 to $75,000, representing the majority of graduates working in small firms, government positions, public interest law, and other roles that make up most of the actual legal job market. The second peak sits around $190,000 to $225,000, representing large corporate law firms, commonly called big law, a segment that hires almost exclusively from a small number of top-ranked schools and typically represents somewhere around 15% to 20% of a given graduating class nationally. There is no meaningful cluster of salaries in between those two peaks. If you take the mathematical average of all graduate salaries, you'll get a number that sounds respectable, often cited around $130,000, but that average describes almost nobody. It's the statistical midpoint between two groups that rarely overlap, which means most prospective law students, who see average lawyer salary headlines are anchoring their entire financial expectation on a number that doesn't represent their most likely actual outcome. Before you can practice, at either end of that distribution you have to pass the bar exam. And this adds another real cost on top of everything else. Most graduates take a formal bar prep course, Barbary and Kaplan being the two largest providers, running $2,000 to $4,000. The exam registration fee itself runs $500 to $1,000+ depending on the state. And that's before character and fitness review fees, which every state requires as part of licensing. If you want to practice in multiple states, many now use the uniform bar exam, which allows score portability. But each additional state still charges its own application and licensing fees. And passing isn't guaranteed. National first-time bar passage rates typically run in the 75% to 80% range depending on the year and jurisdiction, meaning a meaningful share of graduates face the additional cost and lost income of a second attempt, sometimes a second bar prep course, entirely, before they can begin practicing law at all. Let's say you land in that second salary peak, a big law associate position at $190,000 to $225,000 a year. This is where the headline number starts to look very different once you understand the hours attached to it. Big law firms typically require associates to bill somewhere between 1,900 and 2,400+ hours annually. And billable hours are not the same as hours worked. Billable hours exclude time spent on business development, training, administrative tasks, and the inevitable time lost to revisions and non-chargeable client communication. To hit a 2,200 billable hour target, most associates report actually working somewhere between 2,600 and 3,000 hours a year, which works out to routine 60 to 80 OA work weeks, including regular weekend work. Divide that starting salary by the real hours worked rather than the advertised 40-hour week, and the effective hourly rate, while still solidly upper middle class, is considerably less impressive than the headline salary number suggests. If you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find videos like this one. There's also the attrition structure of big law, which most incoming associates underestimate. These firms operate on an up or out partnership model, meaning associates are expected to either advance toward partnership or leave the firm, typically within 5 to 8 years. Industry data on associate retention consistently shows that a majority of big law associates leave their firm, voluntarily or otherwise, within the first 3 to 5 years. Whether due to burnout, a deliberate lifestyle choice, or simply not being selected to continue on the partnership track. That means the six-figure salary that justified taking on $200,000 in law school debt is, for most people who reach it, a temporary phase of their career rather than a permanent flaw. And the transition out of big law frequently comes with a significant pay cut to a role with saner hours. Now let's talk about the other 80% to 85% of graduates, the ones clustered around the lower salary peak, because this is where most law school debt actually has to get paid off. A graduate earning $60,000 a year with $150,000 in law school debt faces a genuinely difficult repayment math problem. On a standard 10-year federal repayment plan, monthly payments on that balance run approximately $1,700, which on a $60,000 salary after taxes leaves very little room for rent, let alone saving or investing. This is precisely why income-driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness have become central to how a large share of the legal profession actually manages its debt. Working for a qualifying government agency, public defender's office, or non-profit legal aid organization for 10 years, while making income-based payments can result in the remaining balance being forgiven. A program that has become a genuine career strategy rather than a fallback option. But like every federal forgiveness program, it comes with real bureaucratic risk. Loan servicer errors, employer certification mistakes, and shifting program rules have disqualified a meaningful number of borrowers who spent a decade making payments they believed were counting toward forgiveness, only to discover a paperwork technicality reset the clock. Solo and small firm practice adds a different layer of cost entirely. The same captive cost structure we've seen across nearly every business this channel has broken down. Office space, malpractice insurance, which for attorneys runs anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000+ a year, depending on practice area, with litigation-heavy specialties at the higher end. Continuing legal education requirements that most states mandate annually, bar association dues, legal research software subscriptions running hundreds of dollars a month, and the marketing cost of actually building a client base from zero. A solo practitioner isn't just practicing law. They're running a small business, and industry surveys consistently show that a large share of solo attorney income in the first several years goes toward overhead rather than take-home pay, a period many attorneys describe as the hardest financial stretch of their career. Even harder than law school itself, the most instructive case study in the modern legal industry isn't a small firm failure. It's the collapse of Dewey and LeBoeuf in 2012. At the time, one of the largest law firm bankruptcies in American history, Dewey had aggressively recruited star partners with guaranteed multi-year compensation packages, sometimes multiple millions of dollars annually, regardless of the business those partners actually generated. Financed in part through hundreds of millions of dollars in bond debt, the firm issued to fund those guarantees. When the 2008 financial crisis hit corporate legal work, and those guaranteed packages became unsustainable relative to actual firm revenue, partners began leaving for competitors, taking clients and billings with them, and the firm collapsed within months, leaving over 1,000 attorneys and staff suddenly unemployed and creditors pursuing hundreds of millions of dollars in unpaid debt. The lesson wasn't that Dewey's lawyers were bad at law. It's that even a firm generating enormous headline revenue can collapse when its internal compensation structure is financed on debt-fueled promises rather than sustainable economics. A risk that exists at the firm level, regardless of how talented any individual attorney inside it happens to be. The risk in this profession isn't limited to firm level. Financial collapse. According to studies the American Bar Association has conducted on lawyer well-being, attorneys report rates of depression, anxiety, and problematic alcohol use significantly higher than the general working population, driven by billable-hour pressure, adversarial daily work, and a culture that has historically treated burnout as a normal cost of doing the job, rather than a structural problem worth fixing. And the legal job market itself went through a genuinely difficult contraction. Following the 2008 financial crisis, when law school enrollment had been rising for years, even as the number of entry-level legal jobs shrank, leaving a well-documented multi-year period where a meaningful share of law graduates couldn't find work requiring a JD at all. A period that reshaped how seriously prospective students now research employment outcomes before enrolling. Let's put two outcomes side by side, because the path you land on changes this math enormously. Scenario 1, the realistic big law outcome. You graduate from a top law school with $200,000 in debt, land a big law associate position at $205,000, and aggressively save during your first 4 years, living well below your means despite the brutal hours, putting away $50,000 a year while making standard loan payments. By year 4, before attrition or partnership decisions force a transition. You've built roughly $200,000 in savings and investments and paid down a meaningful chunk of principal. If you exit Big Law at that point, which the data says most people do, you carry that financial head start into a lower stress role, arriving in your early 30s with a genuinely strong net worth despite 4 grueling years. Scenario 2, the realistic public interest outcome. You graduate with $140,000 in debt, take a public defender position at $58,000 a year, and enroll in public service loan forgiveness, making income-driven payments of roughly $300 a month for a decade. Your annual take-home is modest, and building meaningful savings during those 10 years is genuinely difficult on that salary in most major metro areas. But at year 10, assuming the paperwork was filed correctly every single year, your remaining loan balance, which would have compounded to well over $200,000 on the standard plan, is forgiven entirely. Your net worth at that point isn't high, but your debt, the single largest liability most young professionals carry, is gone. And you're free to build wealth for the first time on a full salary with no 6-figure obligation trailing behind you. The scale of the legal profession is significant. According to figures the American Bar Association tracks, there are over 1.3 million licensed attorneys in the United States, and law school enrollment has stabilized after the sharp post-2008 decline, though it remains well below the peak years that produced the oversupply crisis in the first place. That's not a struggling profession in aggregate, but it is one where the outcome you get depends enormously on which side of that bimodal salary chart you land on. A fact that has almost nothing to do with how hard you work in law school and almost everything to do with which school you attend, what field of law you enter, and whether you understood the actual salary distribution before you signed $150,000 in loan paperwork based on an average that describes almost no one. If you want to go deeper into how careers and investment decisions like this actually get modeled and evaluated, there's a detailed guide linked in the description and pinned in the first comment. It walks through the frameworks behind everything in this video. Worth checking out? Behind every Esquire is a bimodal bet, a fork in the salary distribution that gets decided years before graduation by school rank, practice area, and market timing, more than by how good a lawyer you eventually become. The title is real. So is the debt that came with it, and so is the specific side of that chart you have to land on for the math to actually work. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing.